Just at the end there, Luca, and I think this is probably something very relevant to Ireland. You were talking about the reset between the UK and Europe and CBAM, and saying things won't happen quickly. But I suppose we're also very conscious that in 2026 we move from the transitional phase to the proper implementation phase of CBAM. What do you envisage in that kind of interim period with the UK if the intent is there but an agreement isn't in place? Or would you hope for an agreement to be in place by then?
Okay, so this is one of the things where, I should get a spokesperson to tell me the official line and something. But okay. To negotiate an international agreement takes time. To approve an international agreement takes time. It is true that the ETS system in the UK started out from a system just like ours, but there are some differences, and then you have to go through issue by issue and see how to regulate. In the case with the Swiss, it took us 9 years. So it's not going to take us 9 years with the UK, for sure. My personal guess, and this is not the view of the European Commission, but my personal guess is that on the 1st of January 2026, it is unlikely that we have a linking in place. But that is why I think the CBAM simplification is very, very important. Because I see that it is already been voted by the European Parliament, it's going to Council this week, I think. And so, for sure, I think that the CBAM simplification will be enforced on 1st of January 2026. And so you've already reduced, let's say, your CBAM hassle to already 5%, 10% of the ones that were initially targeted. And these are the people who are already managing a lot of import and export. They're already making import and export declarations on a daily basis, 10 of them. They only need to tick a box, as I was saying. So I think, yes, there will be an impact from CBAM, but I think that this will be limited and very manageable. Second point, under the CBAM regulation, it is possible also to discuss with another country how we're going to take into account the price. Now, as I was saying, if the Chinese pay carbon abroad, we recognize it. You don't need to do it each and every importer each time to demonstrate which one was the price in the UK and which one was the price in Ireland. I think with partners with such a well-known and very clear market, it should not be difficult to, let's all agree that the price for the UK for this year is 15 euros or whatever. So to bring again further simplification in what do you claim, so that to really make the life of exporters and importers very, very easy.
Okay, there's a question down here at the back.
Hi, good morning. My name is Claire Dupont. I'm research professor at Ghent University and based also at DCU at the moment. I have a question, I think, for Luca more. I was really struck by the comments of Danny McCoy about this idea of we're in a fog of uncertainty on the investment requirements for the energy transition. And yet from a research perspective, we don't have this uncertainty. We know that renewable energies is the future, that the energy transition is a security and competitiveness measure, and the policy tracks seem to be obvious to us. So I'm just wondering, is this miscommunication, or is there something in the details that we're missing in making this less uncertain?
Yeah,
okay.
Look, I think the devil is in the detail. First of all, the direction of travel is clear. In Europe, we're going to be climate neutral in 2050, period. In Ireland, you have your national target. So, but at the same time, that's 20 years away, 30 years away, people are wondering. For me, in power generation, it is clear that we need to go as much as possible on renewables, reduce the imports, and there is the question of nuclear, which of course is not very popular in Ireland, but I think as Europe, as a continent, we need to have a second look or be a little bit less dogmatic and a bit more practical and let the people who want to use nuclear to use it. Because it's not realistic to have 100% renewables all the time in each and every member state. So I think for power, it's relatively straightforward. For industry, you know that you want to be climate neutral in 2050, but the technology is there, but it's not tried and tested. And also it's much more expensive. tell you the example of steel. In steel, you can have primary steel production in which you melt the ore and the rocks and something. You have to heat to 1,000 degrees. And so far, you can only heat with gas. Or you can do it from scrap, and then you can use electricity. You only heat it to 400, 500 degrees. Question is, okay, let's try to have circular economy, try to recycle the steel as much as possible, use electricity as much as possible, where we have decarbonized the production of electricity thanks to renewable. But if you still want to have some industrial processes that need to have 1,000 degrees, you need to switch fuel. And for the moment, you need to burn hydrogen. It's perfectly possible to burn hydrogen. We've been doing it for 50 years. But, you need to change your things. You need to buy it. You want to buy an hydrogen which is renewable. The production is not very much. You don't know how much it is going to cost. How much is it going to cost next year? How much is it going to cost in 10 years? So from our side, we are trying to reduce the investment uncertainty. We subsidize the building of demonstration plants. There are now 4 or 5 plants that run on hydrogen to make steel. We have auctions in which we procure steel at a fixed price, so we pay a subsidy, and then hydrogen. We buy contracts for the future supply of hydrogen at a fixed price, and then we put it back to the disposal of industry. So we're trying to reduce this investment uncertainty. I think it is true. We are at the moment that, you're the penguins on the iceberg. It's time to jump. Do I jump today? Do I jump tomorrow? But the direction of the jump, the technology of the jump are very clear. And we try to put money towards helping people jump with as much comfort as possible. Laura, I don't know if that's also what you do from your side.
Thanks very much, Luca. Can we do another question?
Hi, thanks. It's been a very interesting morning in that you've talked about a lot of the things that I'm interested in and thinking about, but not anything I'm directly working on. So forgive me if I'm a little bit off my own personal expertise here. But I'd like to tie together what you said right at the start about Europe being the rule setter or the standard maker for the world. And then the final talk there talking about the import and the export and pricing. It seems to me that this is a perfect example, a perfect opportunity for Europe to act as the trend setter and the policy maker for the world by inviting in other nations into this scheme where they could, trade within this scheme so that we wouldn't have to have the equalization for imports and exports, and by allowing particularly the more developing nations certain exceptions where they have very underdeveloped sectors where we wouldn't require them to count their emissions in those sectors. It appears to me that there's a great synergy in that. Now, I know obviously this wouldn't work with the current US administration, but if we'd begun it at this stage with some other nations that maybe are like-minded or are developing and would like to get in, this may very much appeal to China and perhaps even the US when it has a change of mind down the road. Thanks.
Okay, thanks very much. Luca, you're up again.
Sure. So the Paris Agreement, which is the UN agreement that in which all the countries come together to work on climate change, is based on the fact that there is common but differentiated responsibility. So less developed countries, they need to do less. Also, they're less the cause of the problem. And there is a massive mobilization of climate finance to help developing countries invest already into green technology. If you think about the telephone, for example, in Africa, we skipped completely the development of telephone lines and went directly into the mobile phone. Can we do the same for renewables? Can we skip the coal-fired electricity plants and go straight to as many removals as possible, for example? This is what we are trying to support in terms of policy and in terms of finance. I just want to correct, when we talk about CBAM, because CBAM is steel and aluminium and cement, first of all, there's not a lot of international trade of cement because it's really heavy. And second, there are not a lot of least developed countries that export steel to us. And so the impact there is much more limited. I think we hear a little bit of aluminium from Mozambique, but it's really, really small. And the key issue is as in every question of international economic governance, is how do you deal with China? How do you deal with emerging economies? The Chinese now are polluting more than us. The cumulative emissions of China, now they're higher than the cumulative emissions of Europe. And we had the Industrial Revolution 200 years ago. So that's the elephant in the room, in my view.
And maybe just a line to that to come in, because in the context of regulation and EU driving regulation, and I suppose you look at the Irish situation, not only on the climate side, but kind of broadest environmental kind of issues, I think the regulation from an EU level has driven huge improvements in the Irish situation and the quality of the environment in Ireland. So I think we need to recognise that, and something we highlighted through the EPA State of the Environment report in 2024. But also, as part of that, regulation can sometimes be seen as a kind of a negative or a burden. You know, it's been demonstrated time and time again that regulation drives innovation. So in the context of, for example, the ETS, it drives industry and it makes it economically viable for industries to try out new technologies, to do things in a more sustainable way. So I think sometimes regulation is just seen as this negative burden on business. It's actually a huge opportunity. And as I said, we see that time and time again, and we should recognise that as part of all of this. And this idea of then the technologies developed in Europe, that knowledge can also be exported to other countries so that they don't have to go the same pathway that we've gone along.
Great. Okay, we can see another hand up here.
Oh, hello. I felt compelled to ask a question as the microphone was right here. My name is Johnny Meehan. I'm from Forvis Mazars. And the question I have, it could be for Luca or for yourself, Laura and Emer. It's about the Green Deal. Because lately I've been trying to understand what happened with the Biden presidency and the announcement of their own Green Deal, the 1.3 trillion investment, and how it got stuck where they announced it. There was a great expectation to be a rollout of massive infrastructure projects. And when it came to the election time, there were no deliverables. And so what can we learn about what's happened in the US that we can apply in the Irish situation and the European situation, where we can speed up implementation and overcome the obstacles around infrastructure development? And also, I've heard simplification mentioned a lot by yourself, Luca. I'm interested in how far we're willing to go in simplifying at a European level while not deregulating under such things as a series of omnibus. I don't know what the plural for that is. And, so there isn't on the table, in a sense, a concession for when we enter into trade talks. We've discussed the UK agreement, which is good. But when we get into discussions with US and other nations, how much of this simplification will be deregulation and on the table? So 2 parts in summary. One about what we can learn about the Green Deal and what happened in the US. The second around simplification. Thank you.
Okay, so certainly the shift in the Green Deal is all about implementation now from a more legislative approach previously in the last number of years. But Laura, do you want to come in first and then we'll hand over to Luca?
So I can, well, thank you very much. And it's obviously great that you were sitting beside the microphone, because great question. And it kind of comes back to this aspiration versus implementation, certainly from my perspective. 2 things that strike me, and simplification doesn't have to be deregulation, and it shouldn't be. And I think the example of CBAM is a really good example of where you try something out, you then learn from it, and then you make changes that mean that the outcome is still similar, but it is done in a more efficient way. You know, in the context of CBAM, if you're still covering 95% of the emissions that would have been there previously, but you can reduce the number of companies by such a significant amount in Ireland, and I know Maria will be talking about it later, from 300 to 100 companies having to be involved, that's still having the result. And I think that's really important. The risk we have is that actually its simplification is deregulation by another name. And that's something I do think we need to watch out for. And look, we've learnt in Ireland, and we've learnt right across, I suppose, the world, that if you don't have proper regulation in place, there are consequences. Interestingly, having talked to companies in America recently, and some of the concerns there is around maybe the denuding of the regulatory piece, and that something will happen. And then the pendulum will swing completely the other way. There will be a very significant incident because there hasn't been proper regulation. And then the consequences will be huge, and also means there isn't a level playing field. So I think we do need to be really careful in the context when we say simplification means simplification, but the outcome, the destination needs to be the same. And that does link to the overcoming obstacles as well, and you know, the barriers to getting things done. There are some real barriers, and there are processes that need to be more efficient. And I look to the EPA ourselves. We are looking to see how can we make sure that all of our processes are as efficient as possible, and we can make decisions in a timelier way. However, that doesn't mean that it's a free-for-all. And again, I would say we've seen in the context of the Irish situation over the years that when you don't have proper oversight, the consequences are there and the cost is there later on. You're not avoiding a cost. It will just be a higher cost at a later stage. Lastly, in the context of the Green Deal and learning from the US, I can only give my personal opinion on that is it needs to be real to people, and we need to meet people where they are, and we need to make things understandable and relevant to them in their daily lives. And, you know, we were talking earlier about targets, you know, a 51% target, a 42% target, this target, you know, that is very abstract for people. But when we can say that your homes will be warmer, you know, your air quality is cleaner, you're not going to be kind of at risk of economic shocks from costs of fossil fuels going way up and suddenly your electricity bills go very, very high overnight. All of that's much more real to people, and I think there's a risk that we talk in abstract rather than the reality. And, you know, it is good. I think in Ireland we are quite good at talking about what are the real impacts on the ground. So that would be it from my perspective.
Okay, Luca, do you want to add anything specifically from the European Green Deal?
I fully agree that simplification is not the regulation, but also because if you come from the conviction and the certainty that going towards greener products is going to bring you more market power and being more competitive, then, okay, you want your regulation to be as light as possible, but you still want your regulation to help nudge the transition. Of course, business innovates and business drives, but every time I spoke to a lot of companies, there is this wish that things would remain the same. It's natural. I want things to remain the same, but things happen. And if even the Chinese have understood that the green economy is an avenue for growth, I think our job is to help European companies run on a level playing field, but in that direction. So yes, we can cut red tape. I'm the first to admit that civil servants really like declarations and forms and things. Let's cut them as much as possible, but not at the price of delaying investment into what is going to make us better. We also need the doctor.
Thanks very much, Luca. Okay, so we'll bring this session to a close, and just to say, can we give a round of applause for all of our speakers?